Starrel's first limited shielding character is right around the corner, in the form of our fruity little friend, Aventurine. Now Aventurine is our fourth limited sustaining character, and if you don't have two of them already, he is arguably a must pull. The limited sustaining characters in the game currently are just so much better than our forced options that just having them makes endgame content so much more comfortable. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, because in this video we're going to be focusing on his Lightcone. Now before we get started, I just wanted to thank all the people supporting my channel. I know I'm still very small right now, but seeing videos breach 10,000 views, even 50,000, and seeing tons of people commenting has been a literal dream come true. I'm going to try my absolute best to keep releasing videos you guys like so we can continue on this amazing journey together. So seriously, thank you guys so much. Now if you've been looking around Honkai Star Rail communities, you might have seen discussion about Aventurine's Lightcone and how it's much better than his free-to-play options. Now that would make a lot of sense. I mean, just look at it. It comes with 661 base defense, which is the highest we've seen from a Lightcone in the game. It gives 40 defense percent as well as 40 crit damage, and then on top of all of this, it gives him a debuff that he can apply on his follow-up that increases damage taken by enemy targets by 10%. Now this isn't a perfect Lightcone. The debuff on the Lightcone is actually really good when it works, but because it says it has a 100% base chance, this actually is affected by effect hit rate. So for 100% base chance, you actually need 67% effect hit rate to land this debuff every time, which you don't really want to build on him, so it can be a bit annoying. Now if we compare this to his best free-to-play Lightcone, which is from the Memory of Chaos shop, base defense of 463 and 48 damage percent assuming you're hitting 4000 defense. And honestly, this isn't that bad, but it doesn't really come close to his signature, especially when you realize you have to stack a whole lot more defense instead of crit just to hit that 4000 for his major trace. And just coming off Acheron, this isn't the greatest look for Star Rail. After all, we don't want our characters and teams to be substantially weaker without signature Lightcones. Luckily, however, Aventurine's Lightcone only seems this way if you're looking at Aventurine by himself. See, the problem is Aventurine is just your sustain unit, and while half his utility is revolved around his own personal damage, in a team environment, his damage doesn't really come close to your DPS units. Now before we really get into it, I want to clarify that if you want Aventurine's Lightcone and you are planning to get it for him, just go for it. If you really like the guy, and I mean who doesn't after the 2.1 quest, I'm not going to stop you. It honestly is a pretty decent investment. Lightcones just do cost a lot of jades, and more than likely it will be better to save for newer characters or other forms of investment. So if you are a low spender / free-to-play player, or you're someone who is struggling in endgame content like MOC, and you've been hearing people say his Lightcone is a must pull, I highly recommend you hear me out. Now Aventurine's kit is actually out with their numbers, and no, it's not just from the leaks. Hoyoverse has certain larger creators who have access to a private server and can upload content about these characters before their release. His numbers are stated as subject to change, but it is unlikely with how soon the patch is coming out. Now with his numbers, his damage is looking pretty decent. It's not damage you can ignore, but it's nowhere near the numbers your DPS is going to be putting out. But the best part is you're always going to be building him for damage. Since his major trace gives him crit rate based on his defense, this means you're not sacrificing crit by putting defense on him to make his shields bigger. Now once again, his damage is really good, considering he's primarily a sustain unit, but it's not something that's going to drastically affect your team performance. Now let's look at some actual numbers. First, I want to quickly talk about the debuff the Lightcone applies, which is actually really good. It says it increases damage taken by the attacked enemy by 10%. Now this debuff is actually really good because it's damage taken, not damage percent or death shred. This means when this debuff is on the enemy, they literally just take 10% more damage. This is insane obviously, but the problem is, as I mentioned before, it is affected by effect hit rate. Now luckily Aventurine's follow-up is multi-hit, which gives you multiple opportunities to land this effect, but in an AoE scenario you might not be able to land it on all enemies. Kazjire, who is a known theory crafter in the community, put out a video on Aventurine almost a month ago, and he calculated a 33% damage increase from signature to the MOC shop option. Concert for 2 is a Lightcone that's actually going to be on Aventurine's weapon banner, so I guess it's a bit of a consolation prize, similar to how Acheron had Goodnight Sleep Well on her banner. Day 1 of My New Life is a fantastic option if you have high refinements, as it gives a lot of def percent and also helps your teammates be a little tankier. People with Japard's Lightcone, your day has finally come, because it is actually incredible with Aventurine. It has a very high base defense at 595 and gives a permanent 24 defense percent. Now if Aventurine gets hit, which is going to be quite often because he is preservation and this Lightcone increases taunt, this defense increase doubles for 1 turn. Now this does still come behind his signature at 22%, but I'm unsure if he included the bonus defense from getting hit, and I'm 100% sure he didn't account for how you might get bonus follow-ups from getting hit. The way Aventurine's follow-up works is it gains 1 stack when allies with his shield are attacked, but when Aventurine himself is attacked, he gains 2 stacks. With Japard's Lightcone, Aventurine is going to be hit more himself, so it is very likely that he will be able to get additional follow-ups compared to when using other Lightcones. Depending on how many extra follow-ups you get from his Lightcone, this could honestly come really close to his signature. Now regardless of this, if you've been following HSR theory crafting, or just character builds in general, 20% to 33% is one of the biggest increases we've seen for a S1 to a free-to-play option. But again, this also happens to be the first case in Star Rail where a non-DPS character is getting Lightcone calcs for their own personal damage. As soon as you account for team DPS, the increase you're actually getting from his Lightcone is going to be a lot lower. Let's take an example to understand what I'm talking about. Let's say in a single cycle, Aventurine with this free-to-play Lightcone is doing 80,000 damage. If we take Kazjire's number of 33%, S1 Aventurine will now be doing 106,400 damage. Let's say you're playing with an Acheron who does 900,000 damage in a cycle. With a free-to-play Lightcone Aventurine, you're going to be doing 980,000 damage in a cycle. And with S1 Aventurine on your team, it's going to go up to 1,006,400 damage. So while Aventurine's damage is going up by 33%, the team's damage is actually only going up by 2 to 3%. Now obviously these numbers are completely made up just for the sake of an example, and I might be lowballing or even highballing some of them, but it really gives an idea of how even a huge increase in Aventurine doesn't really make up for much in a team when his damage isn't really close to the DPS. Even when we add the 10% debuff, which is a little inconsistent, the team increase does go up another 10%, but in my opinion it isn't anything to go crazy about. Now obviously depending on your investment on your DPS and your investment on Aventurine, the increase you're actually going to get is always going to vary. And honestly the only thing I can say if you're on the fence about pulling his Lightcone, wait a few days and watch some videos comparing the two options and see if the damage increase you're seeing is actually worth it for you. Now one thing we haven't brought up is the actual debuff the Lightcone applies and what that entails. We have 2 DPS units that really like debuffs, Dr. Ratio and Acheron. For Ratio it's not a huge deal, especially if you're playing with an actual debuffer like Pella or Silverwolf already, but if you are playing with a Topaz in dual DPS and you don't have E1 S1 on Topaz, this debuff can be really helpful in making sure his follow-ups are consistent. Now for Acheron, this is a bigger talking point, as debuffs can help her stack her ult faster. In a combat scenario like MOC, if Aventurine's Lightcone is helping you stack even 1 extra ult, that's going to be a huge deal. Adding an entire Acheron ult is going to be a lot more than that damage that we mentioned earlier. But once again, there's ways around this. Trend of the universal market is a 4-star Lightcone for our preservation units that applies a burn debuff to enemies when they hit the holder. As a preservation, Aventurine will have the highest taunt value on the team, so this Lightcone will likely stack Acheron's ult even faster than his signature. Enemy attacks are also just going to be a lot more frequent than Aventurine triggering his follow-up. Now obviously you're going to lose an actual useful debuff from Aventurine's S1 and his personal damage is going to drop a lot, but once again in an Acheron team, getting extra ults is always going to amount to way more damage. Now just to summarize, while Aventurine's Lightcone is absolutely absurd for his personal damage, in a team environment, this increase isn't really worth the investment. It's probably better to save your Jades for newer characters since Star Rail pumps them out so frequently, or if you've been hyper investing in one team, either pull the DPS units Lightcones or even Harmony Lightcones, as they generally help the entire team more. But once again, if your goal is to just make your Aventurine as strong as possible, then absolutely go for it. If you enjoyed this video or found anything helpful, please leave a like and subscribe, as I would really appreciate it. And if you are going to be pulling for Aventurine or his Lightcone when the banner drops, good luck and thanks for watching.